So hi Addy, how you doing?
Hi, Mark. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm excited about this. We're putting our baby out into the public domain, introducing people to the maturity model. And then you've been working on this with clients. So we're going to go through briefly just some of the headline things to help people understand the concepts. And I'll be asking you a couple of questions about how people have used it. But as much as possible, we want people to download the pack and get to grips with it. So we're just going to run through some of the basics of that so that they understand what we're doing. So let's start with the first question. How does it work? Very simply, you can either pay us to run this process for you, or we've created this as a self-service DIY toolkit. You download the kit and you give it a go. And we talked about this. It's really to encourage people to do it for themselves, isn't it? We really want people to do it for themselves.
Totally. We can't help everybody. Can't sit down with them to go through it because it's a bit of a process. So we've spent quite a while, last few months, to try and create this self-service product that people download and can go through it. And we're always here. If someone needs some help or guidance.
Yeah. And just to underline, I mean, in terms of how we've used it, you've been working with some big companies, and we won't say who they are because we don't talk about our customers in that way. But you've worked with some very big international companies on this, so we know the model works in a big scale. We also know that small organisations can make use of it, and all points in between, really. We also have an HE specific model, which you'll find elsewhere on our website. We will reference that at the end again, but this is really about working with teams who are building digital services, websites, apps and so on. That's the type of people we're engaging with most in our work, and this is really the focus for that. So how does it work? It answers, I've got 6 questions here. I'll read out first, and then I just want to know how you feel people respond. But people want to know where they are now. This model helps you assess something about where you are now in terms of development. Where do you want to go to? It helps you prioritize issues and make some changes. We really focus on incremental achievable steps. We don't want pie in the sky. We'd love to do these big things. We want to know where you're going to go next in the next 6-12 months. We want to help set a benchmark for future review so you can come back and see what progress you've made and identify changes you want to do on an ongoing basis. And finally, we want to build a shared vision for everyone in your organization. We want people in a room to talk together. But I know you're also keen to emphasize to people that it's about what they do. And I think that's something that you really sort of, when you're working with clients, you really sort of put it back into their court, don't you?
Totally. So just to put it out there, this isn't an accessibility audit we are doing for you. The whole process is really to provide you this framework in which you can put all of your accessibility efforts to date. You can put them in this framework. And then also identify through going through the process where there are gaps. And we don't do all the work. We all work together. So we're working with key stakeholders from your organization, and we're coming up with identifying where the gaps are, and then identifying how to move forward incrementally. And like you mentioned, Mark, it's really important that the actions that come out from going through the process are doable, achievable, and relevant to your organization.
Cool. So every structured process we've been through adopts these 7 steps. The person who downloads the pack is the one leading the project, we sort of think, but there may be someone else in your organization who's going to do this. You need to identify some stakeholders. Who else is interested? Who else is engaged in this? There's some suggestions in the how-to pack about who to talk to. Then issue a survey to them. The questions that we use in our survey are in the download. Now, 2 really important stages. One is the first assessment session. It's very much a listening exercise when we run it. Then we draft an action plan based on what we heard. There's some details in the download that shows you what that's about. And then we come back into the assessment session again, and we sort of verify and check in with people. And we tend to find that people come to the first session and sort of unpack things, and then more people come to the second session because they've heard what is being discussed, and we almost certainly find more people in the second session than the first one. Then draft up some final report, and as we say, we want that to be very practical. We want to agree what we're going to do next. We'll come back to that in a moment about what's actually in the final report. And then a really important step for us is that you follow it up. You don't just write a report, agree 6 or 7 things you're going to do, and leave them to just cogitate. We want you to come back in 6 months, in 12 months, and to look again. And that's why the benchmarking is so useful. So, whether we do that for you or whether you're doing that yourself, those 7 steps we think are pretty simple. A lot of materials we've provided can help you step through that and explain it. But hopefully that gives you an overview about how this works, just taking stock of where you are, agreeing some actions, and then following them up. So what's inside this? What does maturity look like? And I think there's an important point here, Addy, is, we're looking at an organization here, not their website. That's really clear, isn't it, from the start?
Mm-hmm. Totally. We're not, like I said, we're not auditing your website. You won't know how many high priority accessibility issues you've got with your app at the end of this process. But what you will know is why you're having apps and websites which are inaccessible, what's leading to that taking place in your organization. So the whole idea is, at the end of this process, and once you mature in accessibility, digital accessibility is embedded in your organization. Making inclusive digital products and services is part of your DNA. That's where we want you to get to as an organization.
Cool. So we've created 5 areas for you to look at, what we call our dimensions: vision, leadership, processes, capability, and procurement. We're going to talk through those very briefly. There's loads of detail in the download about how you decide where you are, what you're doing in that area. And for each of them, you're trying to log yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. Are you at the very beginning of that journey in terms of sorting out your vision or understanding your needs in terms of capability? Or are you really optimal? Are you best practice? Are you working really at the best you can in that area? That's the broad principle. And the grid that sits in the middle of it, which is also in the download and is in slide decks that you can download. The left-hand side of that grid is those 5 dimensions: vision, leadership, process, capability, and procurement. And then across the top are those 5 levels that we're trying to get you to place yourself on. So the task really in the exercise, and certainly in assessment session 1 and assessment session 2, you're really plonking some X's in this box that sort of show you where you think you are now. And then the simplest way to answer it is, if you put yourself at level 2 on vision, probably you're aiming for level 3. That's the most obvious thing for you to do next, is to look at what's in level 3 and think about how you're going to get there. So that's the broad concept of this. We've kept it simple at that top level. We're just going to go through some of the details now to show you how you know where to put yourselves on these grids. But this is all in the notes when you download it. So let's take an example of vision. The goal for you in terms of your organization is to have a clearly stated vision about why and how you're adopting best practice in accessibility and inclusive design. So as Addy said, we don't start with an audit. We don't start with any of the detail in terms of technology. Do you really know why you're doing this? And it's a tricky question for lots of organizations. And we then provide you with some possible answers to know where you are across the grid. So under level 1, there are 3 bullet points we've suggested. If the value of accessibility is yet to be fully recognized at senior level, I'm afraid you're probably at level 1. Whereas you'll see in the grid, when you get up to level 5, you've got reports and benchmarking shared with the board. It's available to all external stakeholders and used for future planning. You're really clear that you've made a commitment to accessibility and inclusion, and you know why you're doing it, you know what getting into it for. And I think that a lot of people working in accessibility will know that senior leaders don't necessarily understand what accessibility is for. So we're not expecting people to level 5 straight away. We just see this as a progression and a way for you to sort of benchmarking this. So Addy, you use this when you're in session 1 with customers. What's their response to this sort of grid? How do they respond to it? What do they first say when they start using it?
Well, for most customers, we are starting towards the left, so like level 1, level 2, and when people read this, there's always a point that resonates with them. They'll realize that, oh yeah, there's some passion for accessibility, in our team, or some people in our organization, but it's not something that's official. It's not something that we've got senior buy-in. If we want to do something, it's always a bit of a like a passion project, as opposed to it's mandated from a senior level. So a lot of organizations, it is like that. They've realized there is a gap with vision, or they might not even have a statement that communicates what their accessibility vision is in their organization. So even something as small as writing a little statement of intent, or why accessibility is important. Even small things like that are really powerful and impactful at this stage, and it becomes apparent the lack of them when we do the process.
Yeah, and I think again you need to dive into some of the detail here, but take accessibility statement as an example. If you don't have one on your website, you haven't got one on your website. That's it. Simple. You can tell that you haven't, and then you probably need one. So, and creating an accessibility statement is a fairly straightforward process if you haven't considered it before. There are lots of examples that we share within the resources, within the documents we've got. So your next action is to look at how you're going to create an accessibility statement. That may not be your role, it may be others in the organization, but you can see how you're starting to move along that track towards maturity. Whistle stop tour of the other 4 dimensions. They all work the same way. Leadership. Is the organization committed to investing in people and resources it needs to deliver its vision? You've got this grand vision about setting yourself as an accessibility leader, and you understand why you're doing it in terms of your business benefits or your social goals. But have you committed to investing in the people and resources you need to fulfill that vision? There's questions in the grid that will ask you about your leadership investment. A really key one, I think these 2 next ones are ones that feel really practical. Processes. Is accessibility and inclusive design embedded in every stage of the project development lifecycle? Do you just test it at the end, or do you include it at the very beginning when you're thinking about your development processes and even your initial envisaging of your services for your customers? That's where really ideally you'd start to build in and bake in that best practice and learning. And so you have a whole development cycle from initiation through to testing, release and follow-up. Where are you thinking about it in there? And then one, I know, Addy, that we get asked a lot about is capability. Does your organization have the skills, tools and resources to deliver its vision? And I guess in here we're talking about training and tools. Do you have a testing tool? Do you have the sort of capability? But I think this is quite practical for a lot of customers, isn't it? This is an area they can really see that they can make improvement.
Totally. I mean, in a lot of the sessions you have people identify that they've not got the right training in place. They don't have the right tools to enable them to work and test for accessibility, for example, or design for accessibility. It's also the dimension in which people realize that they don't really have some type of space where people can come together for accessibility. So some type of shared online space or a place where people can ask questions. And so yeah, this is quite an important part of the process, this dimension.
Okay, this is also an area we talk about things like accessibility champions networks and other connections outwards to other parts of the organization, isn't it? I mean, the other thing to mention here, looking back at stakeholders, is this is why HR is important. Is your team ready to deliver the accessible solutions you're looking for? Are you going to recruit people with the skills and therefore their job descriptions need to reflect that? Or are you going to grow the skills from within the existing team? These are HR questions just as much as anybody else's role within the organization. So you can see here where you're beginning to look at that maturity across the piece and drawing in other parts of the organization to think about practical steps. And we get a lot of feedback at this point about how we can help, what sort of resources we can offer. We do training for all sorts of different roles within the organization, but really what you're looking for is a plan from within that says this is something we need to invest in and improve. And then the final area that often overlooked is the organization ensures that purchasing decisions are compliant and contribute to its vision. This really is a bit of a Cinderella one, isn't it, I think?
It is. It's not that sexy, I think, but it's so important. And one of the recent clients we worked with, all of their development and digital development design was outsourced, and that makes it even more key. If you're paying someone to create something for you, maintain something for you, then it's vital that you have the checks in place to ensure that they're giving you something accessible. Otherwise, you're wasting your money. And I think a lot of large companies that are more mature in digital accessibility, they're becoming very discerning with regards to the suppliers that they work in. So they have a smaller supplier list now, but they ensure to work with ones that that are accessible. And this is not only for any kind of products and services that you create that your customers use, but also internally. If you're an organization that wants to attract diverse talent, have people with disabilities working for your organization, which is obviously key so that you can make inclusive products, you can learn from the insight of your employees, then you need to make sure that your internal systems are accessible as well, and to make sure that you procure accessible systems. And it's quite a new field. There's not enough accessible service providers out there, but the more people ask and the more demand there is for accessible services, then that will have an impact, positive impact.
And I guess it's worth saying that in some big organizations, you might have a procurement team or some sort of very formalized structure, but in a lot smaller organizations, this is really about all the decision people are taking about which plugins to include, which third-party software to take on. So that's covered in some sense around the notes that we have. But equally, if you're a small organization looking at this and thinking about how you're going to improve your accessibility, maybe you're already buying in certain things or having plugins. It's as simple as that at some level.
And it's as simple as just a little question, as part of your process, just to ask a supplier, oh, by the way, is this accessible? Can someone disabled use this? Oh, and if they say yes, you can say, oh, can you just give us some evidence of that? Can you maybe let us know some people that do use it? So it's tiny, just asking the right questions. It doesn't have to be some massive intervention.
Yeah. So where you end up when you've been through the process, this is the goal, is to fill in your X's across that grid. We started with the grid with vision, leadership, process, capability, procurement down the left-hand side. I pretended that you've scored level 1 for vision, level 2 for leadership, level 3 for managed, level 2 for capability, and level 4 for level 4 for procurement. Now, obviously the next step is, okay, well, maybe you could get to level 2 on vision, level 3 on leadership, level 5 on process, level 3 on capability, and level 5 on procurement. It's as simple as that, really, for us when we're starting to talk and work with you. And it really just simplifies and breaks into the what am I going to do next? And if you look at what's at level 2 for vision, for example, it will set you some actions to really move towards being able to tick level 2 next time. That's the beginning and end of the process, really, in the sense of how we use the grid. Beyond that initial sort of analysis, which is embedded within the end of session 2, you then start to create a final report. There's 3 important things here, really. One is we work with you, and if you're working on this on your own, try and get some agreement. Try and get people to agree that these are the steps you're going to take. Don't just farm it out and then not write it down. Try and get a manageable number, 6 or 7 things we try and aim for. Addy's very keen to always try and get you to agree what you're going to do now and what you could do next, what you can do later. You'll see that in the deck, how that plays out in the final report. We want it to be measurable. Can you make sure you know when you've done it? Can you then move on to the next thing? And then finally, set yourself a date for the review meeting. But I think, Addy, this is where you, when you're working with people, I think what you do is often really bring it down to those most practical next steps, isn't it? We really want the change to happen, and we want to see that accumulate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think people, if you give them this impenetrable list of things to do, it's far too complicated. So even if an action seems quite tough, I'd break it down into a couple. So at least you can begin ticking stuff off and getting a bit of momentum and seeing the benefits of that.
Yeah. So final slide, sort of piece of information here I'm sharing is what's in the download. So there's a grid, that 5x5 with some of with the criteria inside. It's actually in one spreadsheet for you to try and get your head around. There's a user manual, so sharing some of these top tips that we've got, getting you closer to actually running the session processes yourself. There's a deck for session 1, there's a deck for session 2, and a final report deck. Hopefully they give you enough clues as to how you're going to fill in your version of that. We're also going to be running some sessions, some webinars and training in the future. So we are going to be offering help to people who've downloaded the pack. So look out for those things. And then finally, there are resources in there as well, shareable links to outside help. If you're thinking, well, how am I going to know what to do? We've got lots of resources on our website in blogs and fact sheets. There's lots of stuff on the internet. We were looking at business case the other day. If you need a business case to try and make the case for your vision, there's one on the W3C site, which we've linked to somewhere in the slide deck. So we're we're not telling you what the answers are. We're just telling you they're out there. You've got to work out what the questions are. I think that's where we're coming from. But Addy, I think what we're really hoping, and we're putting this out into the public domain now. We're hoping people are really going to buy into this bigger vision, isn't it? You know, a digital world accessible to all is our vision. And I think, as you've said, we can't do that on our own.
Totally. The more organizations can begin to embed accessibility and have it business as usual, then the more chances of the digital world becoming accessible and lovely.
Great. Well, if you've watched this far and you've downloaded the toolkit, good luck.
Well done.
I'm sure we'll see you soon. And do keep in touch with us. There's a way for you to feedback and let us know how you're getting on. And we'll look forward to seeing you in some of the webinars in the future. Thank you.